how to mute if you're on the phone.
What was that, Beth?
I don't know how to mute when I'm on my phone, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I can do that for you.
Oh.
There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here tonight. And this is exciting because sourdough bread it's not only fun, but it's super healthy for you. And I'm learning, and I love the fact that I am helping or facilitating while Nancy and Brenda are showing us how to make this bread. And I've definitely learned a lot. And I've got even a discard recipe. So we'll talk about that later. But so we're glad you're here, and I'm going to give a quick educational moment for you guys on sourdough, and I did a little research and on the prebiotics. So Mayo Clinic says you are what you eat. Everyone's heard that before, or more accurately, you are what you feed the trillions of little critters that live in your gut. So what are these critters? Well, the lining of your gut is like the surface of all the rest of your body. It's covered in microscopic creatures, mostly bacteria. And these organisms create a micro ecosystem that we call your microbiome. And I think by now most people have heard that term. And though we don't really notice it, it really plays a huge role in our overall health, as well as our mental health, moods, behavior. So that's why it's really important to have a healthy, balanced gut. And according to some studies, sourdough bread acts as a prebiotic, which basically means that the fiber in the bread helps feed the good bacteria in your intestines. So that's good news. These bacteria are important to maintain a stable, healthy digestive system. And sourdough bread is also low in gluten, and it's lower in gluten than other forms of bread. So even non-gluten-free sourdough can be consumed by some people who are gluten intolerant. Sourdough has a low glycemic index. What does that mean? It means your blood sugar will not spike. But keep in mind, serving. So I did look to see if there was anything negative about sourdough bread. And all I found is that it's a denser bread. So don't go crazy on it. Don't eat too much. keep it under control. And so you can eat sourdough bread and know that you're doing good things for your gut. So I want to talk a little bit more about prebiotics. So prebiotics are basically just plant fiber. That's all it is. And it's like a quick fertilizer that helps grow healthy bacteria in your gut. And so what are prebiotics found in? They're found in fruits and veggies. Just eating your fruits and veggies is a way to get prebiotics, and especially those that contain complex carbs. So that's really important. These carbs are not digestible in our body. They pass through our digestive system just to feed the microbes in our gut. So what about probiotics? What's the difference? Probiotics, prebiotics. Well, probiotics are different from the things that have live. There's a lot of food that's probiotics. So, and there's a lot of strains of probiotics. So it's really hard to know what you're missing and what you need. It's next to impossible. So it's better to eat the food that contains probiotics and prebiotics, and you'll cover your bases. So fermented foods, yogurt, kimchi, kombucha, those are good sources for probiotics. Probiotic supplements are going to, like I said, they have live organisms. And so it's really hard to find the right one. But some people, if a doctor recommends it, then that's probably a good thing to do. So it's hard though to just go out and buy a bottle of probiotics, and really help your health. It's just better to eat the food, right? Mm-hmm. So many people ask, is sourdough bread considered a low carb food? Well, because a lot of people are watching their carbs. It contains less calories and less carbs than other breads, because some of the starches and the sugar in the sourdough bread are consumed during the fermentation process. So that's another good fact to know. So consider this, Juice Plus, if you're on Juice Plus, or if you're taking a look at it, is chock full of fruits and veggies and raw. And that is where these prebiotics come from, as well as many probiotics. And even our complete smoothie mix has probiotics and prebiotic fiber in them. So it's a good thing to know, and it's a good way to start off the day is with a shake and have your Juice Plus capsules or gummies. So the last thing I want to say is that the complete shakes, the plant protein shakes, are really healthy. And sometimes I get asked about the sugar that's in a shake. Well, here's the good news. Did you know that one apple contains 10 to 12 grams of sugar? And it's really important because we need the fiber in the apple, but the Juice Plus Complete has 10 grams of natural sugar and 8 grams of really great, diverse, and excellent fiber and good prebiotics and other fibers. So it ends up being a low glycemic meal for you. So if you have any questions or want to learn more, we can certainly and share more with you. But I thought it'd be fun to learn a little bit more about what prebiotics are and probiotics and how sourdough bread contains them. So now we're going to get started with sourdough bread making. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
And you can kind of do your recap, I guess, if you want to start there.
Yeah. Thanks, Mimi. Appreciate that. And not only good information about our gut health, because that's what we're talking about tonight. Last time we talked about making the starter. And so all we take a quarter of a cup of flour, and it can be any kind of flour, quarter cup of water in a jar, mix it up, put a lid on it. It can be a plastic lid like this, or like a coffee filter with a ring on it, just something loose. You want to leave some air room in there. You do that the first day. Then days 2 through 14, what you're going to do every day, you're going to discard half of the starter. Now you can save it to use for different recipes. Mimi's going to share one with us here in a little bit that sounds absolutely yummy, but there's a lot of them. We can send you some, or there's some online, lots online. Anyhow, you discard half of it, put a fourth a cup of flour, fourth a cup of water, stir it up. And you do that for 10 to 14 days because you're trying to build a mature starter that's going to be strong enough and sturdy enough to bake a bread with, so it can rise well. Okay, so you've got your starter done. You're getting ready to bake bread. The first thing you do in the morning is to get the starter out and feed it a fourth a cup of flour and a fourth a cup of water. And let me back up and say it needs to be filtered water, or bottled water. If it comes from the tap, straight from the tap, it's going to have chlorine in it, and that can kill your living yeast, because this is wild yeast in here that we've captured and are feeding. Okay, this is the one time you don't discard. After you've built your starter up, you don't discard now. So you go ahead and feed it that fourth a cup of water, fourth a cup of flour, stir it up, and let it sit in a warm place for about 4 hours or so till it starts bubbling up. And you want to use it when it's got the bubbles in it because it'll bubble up and then fall back down. So you want it when it's at its most active state. So what you're going to do then, you're going to get your bowl, and you're going to get a half a cup of this starter and pour it into your bowl. Blah, blah. And it's kind of thick. Some of them are thicker than others. Sometimes yours may be thinner and you think, well, mine's not right. This stuff is pretty forgiving. So I want you to know that. Don't freak out about this stuff. And then you're going to put in 1 1/3 cups of water, about 4 cups of flour, and I've got some whole wheat in here. I've got some bread flour. I've got some all-purpose flour, and part of that's because I've used up all my bread flour and all my sourdough baking lately. And then a half of a tablespoon of salt. The salt adds flavor, but it also helps to keep the sourdough, the yeast from rising too quickly and not giving you a firm enough bread. So you're going to stir it. Now I've got this thing here. This is cool. This is called a Danish whisk. You don't have to have that. I'm going to tilt this down just a bit so y'all can see. Going to stir this up until it just incorporates all the flour and the water in it. And then I'm actually going to not do all of this. It may be kind of stiff. You might have to add a little bit more water. That's okay. Just do little bits at a time. And you want it to be kind of sticky, but not too stiff. And you might have to change after a while to a spoon because it's sturdier than this, and get all the flour incorporated. Now, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just telling y'all to do it. And then what you want to do is let it sit for a little bit. Cover it with a wet tea towel or some plastic wrap. Let it sit for about 30 minutes because you want it to hydrate. You want the flour to absorb all the water. And that takes a little more time than we think. You know, we usually like to do things fast, but we don't need to do that for this. So we're going to do that. Now, after that 30 minutes, your dough is going to look something like this. This one's been rising a little bit already, so it's a little fluffier than it would normally be. But we're going to do what some people call tug and tucks or stretch and folds. It's the same thing. It's a type of, they say it's a no knead, but it really is a type of kneading. But you dampen your hand because the dough will be a little sticky. Then you're going to just scoop it up and you're going to pull your dough and fold it over. And then turn it around, pull it up, fold it over. Do that several times. And you're just kind of you're building the structure, the gluten. I know we hate that word, but it's what, it's got to be built up some before it goes away. It's the way sourdough works. So you do that, and then you let it rest. You're going to do that for the next several hours, every 30 minutes or so. It's not an exact science. You just go back in and you fold it over and tuck it about 4 times, but do it about 5 or 6 times. The more times you do that, over 30 minutes or an hour, whatever, the softer, the fluffier the bread will be. It'll just aerates it more and helps to build some structure there. So, but then put your cover back over it and let it set for a little while, and you can go off and do something else. Sourdough does take a while to do, but you don't have to stand over it. You can do other things. And you want to after you do this, you're going to it's going to be the rest time. It's going to be the time that is known as proofing or rising. And that's where, or fermentation, that's where the yeast is working its way into all that bread, and it's doing all that good stuff and getting rid of the phytic acid and breaking all that carbs down. And it's going to take about 12 hours. So usually by the end of the day, you've done all this stuff, you've tucked and you've folded 5 or 6 times, put a cover on it, plastic if you want, or a nicely wet towel so it doesn't dry out, and leave it overnight. Okay. Now the next morning, what you're going to get up and turn the oven on to 450 degrees. Then stick you can use different pans. I like to use a cast iron Dutch oven. Stick the whole thing in the oven while it heats up. Leave it in there for about 30 minutes or so. You want it to get hot. Now, there are different opinions on this, but most people say you want it to be hot, a good hot oven, because it helps with the rising and helps to form the crust like you want it to be. Okay, so that's in the oven, and you get your dough back out, and you're going to, it's going to be all fat and fluffy. It's not going to be this flat. It'll have risen, but you're going to bring it down. Get you a piece of parchment paper. Take your dough and put it onto this parchment paper and shape it a little bit. You can dampen your hands again. Let me show you. Shape it, get it rounded out a little bit like you want. And then you can just let it sit and rest. Now you can get fancy and do all kind of things with it, put it in fancy baskets, but we're just going to talk about the simple way tonight. So let that sit for about 30 minutes or so. let's see, and until your pan is good and hot. Then you go to the oven, you grab with hot mitts, because these things will be very hot, and mine's not hot now, so I'm going to show it to you. And you're going to open up your Dutch oven, and I got too many things here. Stuff it out, and then you're just going to lift this dough and plop it into the Dutch oven like this. Sort of fold the paper down so it doesn't stick out. Put your lid on it quickly, because this Dutch oven lid is going to seal the moisture in there, and the moisture is going to help give it that good chewy texture on the outside, like we think about sourdough. Stick it back in the oven and bake it for about 45 to 50 minutes covered. And then you can take the lid off and look at it and see if you want it to be a little browner. You can leave it off for 5 or 10 minutes and let it finish browning. Then you take it out of the oven, get your cooling rack, but you can also pick up the dough. Well, it'll be a bread, not a dough at that point, and put it on the cooling rack and slide it off. But this is the hardest part, is that you have to let it cool all the way before you cut it. But it will be very difficult, because you will want to cut it and eat it right away, because it will smell so yummy. But if you do that, it's going to be kind of gummy, so you don't want to do that. Now then you just eat it and you enjoy it. Now I want to show you what can happen. Your sourdough may not come out the way you want it to the first time. Actually, the first time I did this particular recipe, it did come out the way I wanted it to, like this. Lovely. See how pretty? Well, this week, I don't know what's going on. We had heat pump problems and no heating in our house. So I think it just didn't want to rise quite right. It was a little denser, but it's still delicious. It's still yummy. It's still got all the good nutrition in here. And so don't say I failed, I'm not ever doing this again, throw it away. No, it's good. It's good. So don't give up. This is not an exact science. There's some art to it. The humidity's higher, you got to add a little bit more flour. The humidity's lower, you need a little bit more water. So don't worry about that. Now, Miss Brenda is going to tell us how to do gluten-free. It's a little bit different, and I'm going to pass that on to her now, Brenda, excuse me, and let you take it away. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited about this. And the reason I'm excited is because gluten-free baking is special. So I'm like, well, gee, they left the special part to me, so that must make me special. So I'm just going to say it like that. One of the things that's interesting about gluten-free baking is that there are a couple of differences, like Nancy had mentioned earlier. She didn't have good success with her bread. I kind of had a bust with my discard, my starter, and my second discard. So it's just been, I came in one day and my discard was green. It had lovely mold growing all over it. So that wasn't too good. So I threw that away and I started again. And then a couple of days later, my actual starter was green. So I'm like, well, drat. So I had it in a big bowl similar to this. And I think it was because the sides were just too open and it just had too much air or something. I don't know. So anyway, I splurged $14, got this thing from Amazon, and I love it. And my starter has done really well because it's got a little bonnet that sits on top of it and then a fat piece of elastic. The other thing about, and I don't know if it's exactly the same with the regular flour, but if you notice, the jar is kind of sloppy looking because I just made this other stuff. If you don't scrape it out, scrape all that extra stuff out, that's where mold can grow. I found that out. And like I say, I also found out that it just works better to have like a cloth lid or something on. I don't know about the plastic. My first starter I put in a bowl. The first discard. The second one I put in a plastic thing. So I don't know if that's what caused it to die or not. But anyway, once you scraped all that down, then it's ready to to sit and wait till when you need it. So I just puts this little elastic on it. And I just have been keeping it on the counter so I won't forget. Okay, so I've got a couple of different things. I made one already. I did not have a Dutch oven with a handle that could handle 450 degrees. So I put it in a pot. I will tell you that and it didn't call for a lid to be on it, but the parchment paper was smoking when I opened the oven. But let me get, okay. So I've got this out. That's what this particular recipe looked like. This is the one that had like sorghum flour. It's got several different things. It had buckwheat flour and stuff. I'm sorry, I forgot about the noise being so loud. Let me take this off and I'll stop talking. Here we go. So that's my sourdough bread artisan style. Now, what I did tonight is I found another recipe. I'm sorry, my little earbuds just don't want to stay in tonight. I found another recipe from Gluten on a Shoestring. I really like some of their recipes and things. And this one actually has butter in it. I have not found any other recipe, just with what I've looked at, especially gluten-free, that has butter in it. So it has butter and milk. Well, since it's gluten-free, that's good for people that are gluten intolerant or people have celiac. But I also can't have dairy. So I put oat milk in this, and I found that oat milk works a lot better than almond milk. It's a lot thicker. And Chobani actually has one that's called plain and extra creamy that I could just drink like milk. I could even put it on a cobbler or something. So that's what I did with this. And this one, I'm going to use this kind of a pan. And you can see this is much higher, much taller than just a regular meatloaf pan. And the reason for that is that the gluten-free actually has to have something to help it. It doesn't have any muscles, because the gluten is the glue that helps make it stand up, like Nancy was saying. This has none of that in there. So it's got to have something else to kind of help it support it. So either it has to go in a pan with a defined shape or in a tall pan. And if I do it like this, then it's going to make it much taller. So I do the same thing as Nancy. Take my parchment paper. I can find it. About it. And just put it in here. Like that. So then this is, it said it was a little bit, the recipe said it would be thinner, but mine's pretty thick. So I'm just going to dump it in here like this and pat it down. And then this, you also have to let rise a good bit. The other thing about the gluten-free stuff that you might want to know, most of the things are stickier and wetter than regular. Sourdough, I think just a regular sourdough, like Nancy was saying, is a little bit sticky. So you have to use wet hands with it. But the gluten-free, when you're doing certain things, I mean, it's just like pancake batter. I had a pizza dough recipe and I put it in the pan. I'm like, this is never going to work, because it looked like I was making a giant crepe. But it was wonderful. It was so good and crisp, and my husband loved it, and he doesn't have to eat gluten-free. So that worked out pretty good. So I'll smooth this down, and then I don't have one to bake for here. I'm not as forward as Nancy. I just had the other one to bake. But I wanted to also say that you do have to have the bread cool. They said if you don't, and I always love to just take the bread out of the oven and slice a hunk off and eat it. But I'll just have to warm it up or toast it or something, because it will not, it just makes it mushy and gummy. And I haven't figured out why. The recipe that I used for my artisan loaf for this one, like I said, had several different ingredients in it. I used for the sandwich loaf, I only had about 4 or 5. It called for tapioca starch, which I didn't have, but I did have potato starch. So I substituted that. I did my gluten-free flour, and this flour is a 1-to-1 ratio. So what that means is I don't have to add anything else. There's a thing called xanthan gum, xanthan gum, that actually helps as a binder to make the stuff stick together, since it doesn't have gluten. So I got this, so I don't have to add the xanthan gum, or if you've got regular gluten-free flour, you can just add a little bit of xanthan gum. It's easy to find. Most of the stores now have lots of gluten-free options. They really have come a long way from having something that tastes like a, piece of sawdust with just a little bit of grease on the top. So, and I think that's all I had. I wanted to thank you again for coming. And I think Mimi was going to see if we had any questions. Mimi, turn it back over to you.
Wow, Brenda and Nancy, thank you so much. I learn every time I hear both of you speaking, and you do keep it easy and simple. So I appreciate that. I know everybody else does too. We do have some questions in the chat, and so I'm going to go ahead and go in there and read them. And so the first one was the question was from Diane, said, so cast iron goes in the oven with nothing inside, just to heat it up while shaping the dough. Is that's a question? Do you put
That's right. But either one, any pot that you're doing with the sourdough, it recommends that you preheat it, and you preheat it pretty hot. To be in a 400 or 450, 500 degree oven, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So how long do you heat it though, is the question? Do you leave it in there for like 30 minutes, an hour while you're kneading it, or the 12 hours while you're doing it, Nancy?
Oh, not the 12 hours. No, some people say 30 minutes and some people say an hour. So you just want it good and hot, because it just helps it to rise better and to get the crispier crust.
I don't think it quits working if you keep it, 45 minutes rather than 30 or something. It's just like Nancy said, this whole stuff is really forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Very much.
And
so.
the cast iron will retain heat very easily.
Yeah, so. I like it. I just had a frying pan cast iron. So
yeah.
And Elizabeth asks, so would a Dutch oven be too big for the gluten-free dough?
In this particular case, the recipe that I had, you can see this is just probably a 4-quart pot, and it pretty much filled it up. But my Dutch oven is probably 3 inches wider, so I don't know if it would be as high. I think I'd rather have a smaller pot. If you had maybe a like a 2-quart Dutch oven, kind of small one, that would work, because it's got to have something on the sides to help hold it up.
Yeah, that's important about the gluten-free dough. And the question, Diane had another question. Brenda, did you knead it just like Nancy did with the other one? Did you have to do the tug?
On that one, some recipes do call for it, but you don't need gluten-free stuff as much, because you're not trying to break the gluten down. That's the idea of kneading it. And as much as I love to just pound that dough and do all this kind of stuff when you're making regular bread instead of sourdough, this won't. It's just because you have all the bacteria, you're using wild yeast and instead of regular yeast. So I think that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know. Well, the last question I'm going to read here, Carolyn just asked, when you feed and use the starter, does the water added need to be room temp or warm?
Just room temperature. It just, depends on your room temperature. I mean, it's not going to hurt. It just slows things down. I mean, my room temperature was like 65 this week, but it's better. It'll do it quicker if it's warmer. So you don't ever want hot water though. That will kill the yeast. Just lukewarm. Yeah.
Well, that's so helpful. And just know the recipes that they've used, and I have one I've used too. We're happy to share all the recipes that we've used. But we'll get those out to you. The last thing I want to show you is the discard. So you may have heard this, you may not, but discard is the part that they say throw it out, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of flour to throw out. Well, you can actually save it, but my recipe said wait till after 5 days of growing it. So these are chocolate chip cookies, and they're made with the discard. And I will tell you that I was a little bit unsure, but someone sent me the recipe, and I honestly had to hide these because my family was eating them up. But they're truly, I think, the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever made. And I've made a lot of chocolate chip cookies in my day, but they were a little bit crispy on the outside and gooey on the inside. So it's not an unusual recipe, but it's using your discard starter. So you can actually take a separate jar and keep that in your fridge. It'll last. It'll be fine in your fridge for a while, and then it won't be. But and you can do that with your starter too. You can put it in the fridge and save it. So we're happy to share all those recipes. So let me stop the recording.